Hi everyone! I'm so excited to welcome you to the very first watercolor brush pen tutorial brought to you by Brite Crown. So today what we're going to be painting is a very simple and easy watercolor flower. So here I'm just showing you the supplies that we're going to need. So you're going to need some watercolor paper, and you're also going to need your Brite Crown watercolor brush pens. So in this tutorial, it's really easy. All you're going to need is two different markers, or actually three different markers if you count the water brush, but two different colors. So I'm going to be using red and green. The red will be for my flower petals and the green for the leaves. And feel free to choose any colors you want to use. If you want to make a pink flower or blue flower with pink leaves, whatever you want, just go for it. Alright, so let's get started with this flower. So the first thing you're going to want to do is open your petal color. So I have red here, and also your water brush pen. And then you're going to paint with your color onto the water brush pen and just kind of try to get that color out as much as you possibly can. And the reason you're doing this is to kind of add some water to your brush, just like you would with traditional watercolors, so that the color comes out kind of paler and more pastel, and the ink flows smoothly. Now that you have this, you're ready to start painting. So for this flower, we're going to start by making two small petals that will be in the very center of our flower. And if you have trouble with the shape of your flower, feel free to pull up a reference photo or just copy the shape that I'm doing that you see on your screen. Notice how the two petals are not making a perfect circle, but instead are kind of overlapping. So with your petals for this flower, all of the petals should be kind of overlapping, not exactly perfectly round, just kind of laid out in a natural looking way. Also, this is not a fully realistic looking flower, as you can probably tell, so this is kind of a more stylized way. So if you don't like the way this flower is, feel free to add your own style to it, change the shape of the petals. This is really just a tutorial for beginners to kind of get familiar with it and create something that's simple. So we're going to have these petals that have white space between them, so try not to connect any petal to the next. You're going to want to leave a sort of outline of white around it to create this cool looking petal effect. So as I continue to add petals going outward from the center, notice how they get thicker and bigger. And also I'm using the water brush marker as well to make the petals, and kind of having a balance between lighter petals and darker petals. As I paint the petals and fill them in with color, I'm trying to keep the color smooth and spread out so that the color doesn't have any patchiness to it. And a good way to do this is to use a round stroke, making little round strokes with your brush, and that way the color gets very evenly distributed across the paper. If you want to have a sort of gradient effect to your petal, you need to be aware of how you're using your pen. So if you're using your water brush and it has a lot of the red or whatever color you're using on it, when you first apply it is when the darkest, most pigment of the color will come through. So using this awareness, you can kind of achieve a gradient. And if you're using your marker, then and it's loaded with water, when you first touch it down to the paper, it's going to be very light, and the more you paint with it, the darker it will get. So use this to kind of create any gradient or change in tone that you want to achieve with your petals. Another tip I have is that when you're trying to put the ink from the colored marker onto the water brush pen tip, you should be holding that marker at a sort of angle so that gravity is kind of helping you get the ink out. Because you'll notice after some time the marker might have a lot of water in it, and it might be difficult for more ink to flow out. Also, another way to stop that from happening is just have a piece of scratch paper on the side, or just on the side of your paper. Just color a little bit to get the paint from the marker flowing again. So I'm just continuing adding in the petals using the water brush or the brush marker to kind of vary the darkness of each petal, and kind of creating an even tone for most of them, maybe a gradient here or there. Just do what you're comfortable with. Okay, so once you've got here, I'm sure your flower's looking great. You should have a kind of circular-ish shape filled with little petals. And now we're going to go through each of the petals and add another layer of shading and detail. And if you like how your flower looks with just one clean tone type of petals, you can totally keep it like that. That also has a cool looking effect to it. But what we're going to do now is just add another layer. So if you want to have a more detailed looking flower, then you can do this step. So now that the layers of paint that we put previously have already dried, once we add more paint to it, naturally it's going to kind of look darker. So I'm just going over each petal, either using the water brush or the marker pen, and just in the center, towards the center of the petal, adding a line of shading. So make sure you're doing this to the petals once that initial layer of paint is dry. So I'm starting off in the center because that's where I had started before, so those are the petals that have dried now. And then once you have that, your flower is done. Now we're going to move on to the next part of our little painting, which is going to be the leaves. So for these leaves, I'm using the similar technique to how I did the petals. I'm just going to be taking the ink from my green marker pen and letting it onto the water brush. And then once I have that, I'm going to use the water brush to create the shape of the leaf. So by doing this, the leaf is going to start off looking very pale and pastel, which is the kind of look I'm going for. If you want it to look brighter and more saturated, you can definitely use the brush marker to apply the ink to make the shape of your leaf. So you can see here I'm just making it kind of round and kind of sort of size that I think would look good in proportion to my flower. Again, just like I did with the petals, I'm trying to keep the color consistent and smooth and spreading it out as evenly as I can to fill the shape. And now I'm just going to continue to add some more leaves around the flower. You can add as many as you want, but for this flower I'm just going to add 2 on the bottom and 2 more on the top. And you can see that when I'm painting my leaf in with the brush marker, I'm going to kind of let a little bit more ink towards the inside of the leaf so that it kind of has a darker gradient looking effect, and then you can kind of blend that out with your water brush to make it look smooth. Now once this first layer of paint has dried, I can go over it again to create a crisp looking line of shading towards the inside of the leaves. And if you want, you can just end your shading right there and keep it like that. I'm going to continue by adding some detailed lines, but I honestly would probably have preferred it without those lines. It looks a little bit too detailed, but you just use your own judgment to see how you would like your flower to look. Now you can see I'm just kind of blending it out using the water brush pen where I see fit. You can keep some lines of shading looking crisp by just not touching them, or if you want them to have a smooth transition, just blend it out using the water brush while the paint is still wet, and you can do that easily. So there you have it. Here is our final result. So this was a very simple and easy flower to make, and I really hope that if you followed along with me, you learned some new watercolor skills. And don't be scared to add a few more flowers around it, or add more leaves or accents, or even add some lettering or calligraphy around it. Alright, that's going to conclude this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and if you have any other watercolor type tutorials that you'd be interested in seeing, feel free to comment below this video and we'll take it into consideration. Thank you so much and have a great day.